Welcome to team this morning. Today is week 5 out of hopefully 24 as we go through the year. Make sure, as always, you sign in on the sign-in sheet, or at least check your name there, add your name if you're new, change your email address if we don't have the right one there for you. We're getting sort of shaped up in all our table groups. If you saw my email this week, we have, I think, 29 tables with at least 5 guys and average of about 8 guys or so. So they're really shaping up well. If your group gets too small, you can join with another group. If it gets too large, there's a couple empty tables you can spread out to. So, but thank you for doing that. Sign up. We'll collect those sheets at the end. Do have a couple announcements for you today. We try to make you aware of opportunities to serve and make a difference. We know not everybody can do all these opportunities. We just make them available to you. There's a small little sheet on your table, a couple of them, about an opportunity to go to Mexico in January, at the end of January, so it's really kind of a good time, but it's a service thing there. We have a project on there we've been involved with for a number of years in Los Cabos, Mexico. Pick one up if you're interested, taking a team of guys down there, and you can also look for more information on our website, and there's a contact person there if you're interested. So we'll make these available for the next few weeks in case you want to go there. Put something on your radar screen as well. We've had a long-time relationship with a ministry called Riverwoods. Now it's called Fox Valley Christian Action, but Riverwoods is a Christian camp in St. Charles, right up by the lake, that serves under-resourced kids in the Fox Valley area. We've had a number of guys involved there for a long time in little projects and construction and some carpentry and stuff. And we're going to reserve a Saturday coming up later in the fall just for a Riverwoods work day, mostly staining and assembly of bunks and stuff for dormitories. So I'll put that in an email this week, some details, and I'll have some information for you next week. But that's just a Saturday morning kind of a service thing we'll let you know about. And then we also have a job opportunity. A team guy runs a business, is looking for a remodeling carpenter, full-time work. So if you or someone you know might be interested, contact me, and I'll give you the cell number and stuff, and then we can go from there. I'll also put that in the email this week. All right? Thanks for that. Okay, here's our story this week, if I can find it. All right. 2 boys are tossing a baseball at a Chicago park. A sports reporter, thinking of what to write for tomorrow's column, is relaxing nearby, just watching the boys play catch. Suddenly, a pit bull breaks loose from a leash and runs out on the grass, headed toward one of the boys. The other boy alertly picks up the baseball and fires it directly at the charging dog, hitting it square in the head, killing it instantly. The sports reporter runs to the boys. "That was incredible. I'm a sports reporter, and I want to write a story about this." The boys gladly agree. Naturally, I want to give the story a sports twist, so how about this for a headline? "A young Cub fan saves friend from certain death." The reporter jots this down in his notebook, but the boy who threw the baseball speaks up and says, "But I'm not a Cubs fan." "Oh, sorry, since we're in Chicago, I just assume. How about this? White Sox fan saves dear friend." "But I'm from New York," the boy clarifies. "I'm a Met fan." The sports reporter writes down, "Delinquent teen murders family pet." Moment of silence for the Cubs. I'm going to show you a clip today. Our first clip this year from one of our favorites, which is Gladiator. The clip I'm going to show you is the speech that Proximo gives his new slaves/gladiators before their first fight. All right, so let me see if I can find this here. Here we go. Do I have to touch that?
Some of you are thinking you won't fight. Some that you can't fight. They all say that until they're out there. Listen. Thrust this into another man's flesh, and they will applaud and love you for that. You may begin to love them for that. Ultimately, we're all dead men. Sadly, we cannot choose how, but we can decide how we meet that end, in order that we are remembered as men.
stopped right there because what happens next is not something you want to see right before breakfast. But Proximo says we are all dead men. We cannot choose when, unfortunately, but we can choose how we meet our end, and we can be remembered as men. I think what he's talking about there is courage. Last week we talked about the legacy of strength, the legacy of spiritual strength. We talked about a young man named Joshua way back in the Old Testament of the Bible, how God encourages him to be strong, to trust God when he says, I will be with you. Spiritual strength means trusting God when he says, I will give you the land, talking about the promised land, to obey God when he says, obey everything I tell you to do. So we talked about spiritual strength. But this week we're going to look at the same passage again, read the exact same passage again, because there's another word following strength that we need to look at today. So Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, we're going to look at the legacy of courage. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Again, 3 times this phrase, be strong and courageous. We're going to talk today about the legacy of courage. Now, what is courage? We tend to think of courage as a soldier in battle. That image comes to us as men. Or we think of someone who's kind of a crazy risk taker, someone who bungee jumps or jumps out of an airplane with a parachute. But courage is not necessarily fearlessness, although it looks like that a lot of times. Courage is better understood, I think, as taking action in the face of fear or taking action in the face of adversity. Being strong, when God says to Joshua, be strong, he's talking about trust, about faith. Keep your faith in me strong. When he talks about courage, I think he's talking about action. Remember this photo? Is it coming up? Oops, one more. Remember this photo? This is from 1989. It was in Tiananmen Square in China during the crackdown on student protesters. And historians call this single man Tank Man, for obvious reasons. He stood in front of a whole column of tanks in defiance of what was happening. Now, we don't know much with certainty about this man. The most probable seems to be that he was a 19-year-old student. Some believe he was arrested and then executed within 2 weeks of this event. The Chinese government denies that and says they never found out who this particular guy was. So we don't really know. But this unknown protester is regarded as one of the most important single people of the 20th century because his action made him an iconic symbol of courage and freedom. Now here's a definition of courage that I kind of like. Courage is allegiance to something greater than your fear. Courage is allegiance to or belief in something greater than your fear. Tank Man's allegiance to or belief in freedom was greater than his fear of the tanks or his fear of dying. God wanted Joshua's allegiance to be anchored in his promise, in his faithfulness. God wanted Joshua's longing for the promised land, a place for God's people to dwell, to be greater than his fear of the enemies and obstacles that stood in his way. And the same thing is true for us, I think. Our courage will come from that to which we are most devoted. Our courage, our spiritual courage, comes from that to which we are most devoted. For example, I think every single one of us in this room would likely run back into a burning building if our families were in there, our wife or our children. because our allegiance to our families, our devotion to our families is greater than our fear of the flames. But would we do that for a stranger? Would we do it for someone who's wronged us, perhaps, an enemy? Would we do it for a Mets fan? I don't think so, right? Unless we have an allegiance greater than what we face in the danger. Unless our allegiance is to something greater. The big question is, where does our ultimate allegiance lie? To what or to whom are we ultimately committed? When we know the answer to that question, we know what the top spot in our internal spiritual org chart is, then we know where our courage comes from, and we know who or what we're willing to give our lives for. Secondly, courage is taking action in the face of adversity. I'm sure some of you saw this story. It was about a month or so ago, whenever that last mass shooting took place at that community college in Oregon. There was a 30-year-old Army vet who had served about 10, 12 years and was just out trying to get his grad degree, finish his degree at this community college, who acted with great courage that day and probably saved lives. His name was Chris Mintz, and he had just left the building when the shooting started. But instead of running to the parking lot, he turned around and ran back into the building to see if he could get people out. And he ran room to room, getting people to leave the building, and he found himself in a room as the shooter approached, in a classroom as the shooter was approaching. So instead of hiding under a desk or running to try to do something else, he ran toward the door and tried to barricade the door and hold the shooter out with his own body. And the shooter shot him through the door twice, came in, shot him 3 more times as he laid on the ground, and he survived. He had broke both his legs with the gunshots, got shot in the chest and in the arm, maybe both arms. But he survived and is going to survive through surgeries and all that. But he acted with great courage on that day. See, often adversity creates fear. And fear can cause us either to panic or to be paralyzed. I've told this little story in the past. You may recall it. But when I was about maybe a sophomore or junior in high school, I used to walk or ride my bike to school. It was only about a mile. And coming home one day, I remember it was maybe it was a beautiful spring day. For some reason, I was coming home after school, didn't have any athletic practice. And as I was walking home, I was within sight of my home, and I was just daydreaming, like a high school kid will daydream. And I started to daydream. I was daydreaming heroic thoughts. And I was imagining in my mind kind of I don't know why I was thinking this, but what would I do if I got to my home and found my family in dire danger? There was some evil thing happening to them. What would I do? And I was in my mind, I was imagining I would fight, I would rescue my family, I would do anything because I love my mom and dad and my family. I would be heroic and brave. And I have no idea why this happened, but my dad, I walked from the back of the house, and I was walking around the corner of the house toward the front to go in the front door. And for some reason, my dad was home from work. He usually wasn't home at that time. He was home from work, and he was standing on our front porch, which I didn't know. And for some reason, my dad, not knowing what I was daydreaming, standing on the front porch, he saw me head down, walking around the corner, and he did this. He went, ah, just like that, because he liked to do stuff like that. And I fell straight over backward, completely paralyzed. I just fell on the ground, and I thought, well, there goes my heroic thoughts. I had no idea what I would do. It's a very funny story. My dad loves that story. When faced with sudden and terrifying adversity, Chris Mintz took action. He ran toward the adversity rather than away from it. God tells Joshua, be strong and courageous because he's going to face great adversity. He's going to face armed, entrenched enemies who are willing to fight him to the death over God's promise. The land was inhabited by some 30 city-states. This is the ancient world now, cities with fortified walls like Jericho, one of the oldest fortified cities in human civilization. The people groups who lived in those cities were not just going to leave quietly as Joshua marched in with, say, 1 million Israelites from the desert. Scholars believe it took Joshua a full 7 years of constant battle to conquer the land. He's also going to face adversity from inside his own people, inside his own army. In one battle, the Bible tells us one of his key guys took some spoils from battle for himself, probably silver or gold. And this was in blatant disobedience to God, who told them, don't take any spoils, destroy everything. But this guy took some to enrich himself. And it brought God's judgment in the form of a costly defeat in the next battle. So Joshua faced adversity from without and adversity from within. Now, we also face adversity, don't we? Many times that adversity comes from the outside, from life circumstances, often from circumstances that aren't fair, that we didn't create. Not a week goes by that I don't hear of someone facing a battle. Maybe it's the battle of illness. Maybe it's the battle of cancer. Maybe it's the battle of job loss. Maybe some other life-changing event that they did not create and do not deserve, but yet it happens. In the ancient book of Job, right in the middle of your Bible, one of the oldest books in the Bible, is a mysterious story about how Satan, the enemy, attacks Job with all sorts of calamity. God allows the attack to take place, but he attacks with all sorts of calamity because he believes that under conditions of suffering or adversity, Job will curse God to his face. But he doesn't. Job stays strong in his faith. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul faces imprisonment, beatings, shipwreck over and over again just because he's trying to share the good news, the gospel of Christ with the world, because he's been called to do that. But he doesn't stop even though he faces suffering. He remains strong, and he continues to act with great courage. Jesus himself, the story right at the center of what we believe as followers of Christ, was falsely accused, falsely condemned, but was obedient to the Father's will. And I don't know if you've ever thought of Jesus in these terms, but with extraordinary courage, went to the cross knowing what laid ahead of him. So sometimes we face adversity from outside us that we didn't create. And God is telling us, be strong and of great courage, great spiritual courage. That's what we need. Sometimes we face adversity from within, from our own bad decisions, from our own struggles with temptation or doubt, and we need a form of courage. We need the courage to admit our failures sometimes. We need the courage to ask for help when we need it and we don't want to. We need the courage to apologize or seek forgiveness for someone we've wronged, a wife or a child or a friend. We need the courage to resist temptation when the enemy tempts. We need the courage to stand for truth. So God says to Joshua, be strong and very courageous, because he's going to face great adversity. Thirdly, we see here that courage is doing difficult things. Courage, simply put, means doing difficult things. Most of you know, in fact, all of us know, it's football season, but it's the very end of the high school football season. It's next week begins playoff times. I still have one playing high school football. And it always reminds me of my, back in the day, my playing days. I played high school football, and I always remember those stories. But I never loved playing football. I loved other things. I loved basketball. I loved other sports, but I never loved football. I was a decent athlete, but I was skinny, weighed like 165 pounds as a senior. And I remember sort of dreading football practice. I looked forward to basketball practice, but I kind of dreaded football practice, especially the days when I knew we were going to do those hitting, tackling drills, because those big guys, it hurt. It physically hurt, and I didn't like it. I remember I would like find ways to tie my shoes and get to the end of the line and try to time it up. I wanted to get to the small guys, not the big guys, if I had to tackle them. But football was a challenge to me. Played was because I was expected to play. But I'm really, really glad that I played, even though I didn't love it, because one of the lessons I learned from playing football had to do with courage. It takes courage to play any sport, just as it takes courage to do any sort of public performance, whether it's singing or playing piano or even spelling bees. And it takes courage because things can go sideways, because you can fail. And when you fail, you're in front of people, and there's a certain humiliation and embarrassment that comes with that. But football is also one of those sports, probably like hockey or rugby, that when you get beat, you also kind of get beat up, because it's a physical game. Requires physical courage. One of my favorite stories from high school football, and I've told this before as well, was my senior year. I played quarterback throughout, and when you're a quarterback, you don't have to hit anybody. You just try to avoid getting hit, and I like that. But I also played defense. I played safety. And the next to last game my senior year, they moved me from safety, where I had almost no responsibility to tackle anybody, to cornerback, where I had responsibility on sweeps. Back in the old days, there were a lot of sweeps, and I'd have to come up and take on the blockers and try to make a play. And I didn't want to. I was terrified, actually. And so the very first game, I'm playing cornerback, just hoping the other team's going to throw the ball, not run the ball. But like second play of the game, here they come. Two pulling guards, fullback, and the guy with the ball. So there's three guys coming at me, and I'm making a read. I'm coming up on the corner, and I'm supposed to hit that first guy to try to make a pile so somebody else can make the tackle. I know what my assignment is. And inside, it's like happening slow motion. There's like, it looks like there's like that tank. There's like three tanks coming at me, and then the guy with the ball. That's what it feels like buffalo coming at me like that. And I come up on the first guy, and I'm trying to think, I can't just dive out of the way because it's going to be on film. So I'm kind of stealing myself. And then number 53, one of my best friends, captain of our team, our defensive end, Don Scott, steps out. He throws off his blocker. He steps up. He's like 5 feet from me. He steps in front of me, and he hits that first guy so hard with his helmet, face on, that his chin strap flies off and flies right by me. Boom! Like that, and it flies off. The first guy hits the second guy, hits the third guy, he makes a big pile. He gets them all. And I come up and I just kind of flop on the top of the pile. It's going to be on film, tackle by number 14, because I'm on the top. And we all stood up, and Don turned around, and his eyes are glassy. I mean, in those days, we saw you got dinged. Today it would be a concussion protocol. He looks at me, and I said, "Thanks, man, thanks." It was the single most courageous thing I've ever seen in a sporting event happen right in front of me, right there. Courage is doing difficult things. We know what courage looks like on the football field. We know what it might look like on the battlefield. Some of you have been in situations like that. But what does it look like in everyday life? Let me give you a couple examples, things I've actually seen and been a part of in my life as a pastor. Here's what courage looks like. A man who admits he has a problem with alcohol or gambling or pornography and confesses that and humbles himself enough to get help. It takes enormous courage to do that. A father who finds a way to have an important conversation with a son or daughter about a topic that's uncomfortable to talk about. A single mom who goes back to nursing school while working full-time and raising 2 young children, sleeping 3 hours a night just to prepare for her family. A middle school kid who confronts a bully on the playground and gets beat up in the process. An executive who refuses to do something he believes to be unethical and gets fired as a result. A college student who articulates his or her faith in a class at a secular university led by a professor who's hostile toward Christianity and gets made fun of. A husband caring for his wife 24/7 over 10 years due to early onset Alzheimer's. A man who's been out of work for 2 or 3 years who continues to get up every day and work at finding work. An executive who lost his job taking a job bagging groceries at Jewel so his family can have health insurance. All these are real stories. They took acts of tremendous courage driven by an allegiance to something greater than their fears or their discomfort. Spiritual courage is driven ultimately by belief in and commitment to the God who reveals himself to us in the Bible. And we leave a legacy of courage when our lives, our decisions, our relationships, and our actions are driven by great allegiance to God and his will. Be strong and of good courage, God says. 3 questions I want you to deal with around the tables today. I'm adding a third one, so get out your pens, be ready to write it down. First, can you describe a time in your life when you personally witnessed an act of great courage? Maybe it was in a football game, maybe it was something else, maybe it's at work, but something that someone you watched, observed, commit an act of great courage. Secondly, can you describe a time in your own life when you wish you had been more courageous? Yep, like me coming around the house and falling on my back because I was scared. Is there a time you wish you'd been more courageous? And thirdly, here's the question. What adversity are you facing right now in your life or soon could face that will require spiritual courage on your part? Are you facing anything right now that requires spiritual courage? So if you get to that third question, that's really where I want you to wind up. Get some coffee, grab a donut, have a conversation, bring me any prayer concerns you have. I'll put the prayer notes out here, wrap you up right before 7 o'clock.